Okay, hi. So I'm Bradley Pitts. I'm from the U.S. I have a background in art, architecture, and aerospace engineering. And I don't know if I'll cover all the topics that you put forward, but I'm going to tell about what I do. Before I do, I want to point out that I'm from the United States. This is the Netherlands, and this term science can be somewhat confusing in the international English that we speak together. So I want to, this is something I presented at the conference, the workshop at the beginning as well, but often the term science gets equated to Wetenschap, if I pronounce that correctly. But then Wetenschap has all these different connotations or translations into English. Science, humanities, knowledge, scholarship, learning, which is quite a big diverse realm. And then if I kind of go to do very simple definitions of these terms in English, science is a very specific, systematic knowledge gained through observation, measurement, and experiment. Humanities includes literature, philosophy, art, etc., as distinguished from the natural sciences. Knowledge is informed learning. Scholarship, knowledge acquired by formalized study. Learning, knowledge acquired by systematic study or by trial and error. So you can imagine if we're equating science to Wetenschap, in English, it kind of breaks down and means everything and nothing. This was kind of a question I arrived to the workshop at the Lorenz Center with, of what sort of collaborations are we talking about? You can, by the way, ask the same sort of questions about art, but being an artist or identifying myself as an artist these days, I'm going to choose to attack the science side of things. And then I think it's also very interesting when you kind of write it in this way, that acknowledging the different education systems in the US and the Netherlands, that art, humanities collaborations, I think, are nothing new, have been happening forever, but I think in the Netherlands the term research often gets held up as something special, whereas in the States, it's, when you search, you do research when you're Googling, so it's not something unique. So that's just a little background that I think is important given our context and that I'm not from the Netherlands. So first I kind of wanted to frame my work. This is kind of an artist statement, if you will. That is a way I've been thinking about my work for some time now. In terms of the domains or overlaps between the words functional, valuable, and real. And these terms are intentionally slippery and multifaceted, so we could write a whole book on what is functional, what does that mean, but I'm also interested in raising that question, as the same with real or valuable. Just for sake of disciplinary, we might equate functional to engineering, science as dealing with what is real. I had to put art somewhere, so okay, let's put it near valuable, which might have market implications and or the fact that it's dealing with values and questioning values. But going back to the original diagram, what I've felt for a long time now is that basically the globalized ethos is more and more compressing this space into one domain in which the functional, the valuable, and the real are all equated. So for example, in the world I came from of engineering, only that which can be measured is considered real, and the measurements are what is valuable, and they're valuable because they're functional. They can be applied to equations or compared on a quantitative basis. So my kind of self-imposed mission, in a way, is to explore the regions where these things aren't all equated. So to let others occupy the central zone and ask, for example, what would it look like to have something that's real but and valuable but not functional, or something that's functional and real but not valuable. These kind of the boonies of this kind of landscape, the outer lands. And then to just complicate it slightly more, problematize it, is like, what if we remap the territories and then we kind of become a little bit unclear what's overlapping with what. So I'll take you through some of my artworks, and maybe it'll become a little bit clearer how I try to do this. This is an artwork called Blind Spots, Internal Peripheries, from 2006. On the left, so this is one artwork, you're seeing the front and the back of it. On the left, you have the front of two postcards. One is from CERN, the particle accelerator outside Geneva, and the other is from a monastery by Le Corbusier outside Lyon. And on the back of these postcards, I took a trip and visited these two locations, both extremely interesting to me. And on the back of the postcards, what I've done is I've traced the blind spots in my eye. So all of us have blind spots within our field of view. It's not the periphery, where the optic nerve connects to the eye. You have no cells that can sense light. And so we have these blind spots that our brains fill in the information, so we don't usually notice they're there. But it's possible with a lot of concentration to kind of trace their form. And so for me, this becomes kind of a dialogue between the scientific, the religious, and the art in terms of the search for the invisible, the unknowable, all these things. Kind of, for me, it starts a dialogue in terms of the methodologies happening kind of within the frame here. This is another work called The Darkness in Between. Might be a little bit too dark in between over there. But what's happening is these big floodlights in the center of the room. I should say this image is from a group show at Kunsthalle Bern, so the work on the walls is not mine. But these floodlights are LED floodlights, and they're flashing 200 times a second. So just like when you're watching the movies, those images are flashing quickly, but you perceive them as a constant. But what's happening is in between those flashes, I've synchronized video cameras. So on the monitors, you're seeing the space in real time with the lights off, because the video frames are only being exposed when the lights are off. So you have kind of these two spaces are occupying the same space at the same time. And there's something else I wanted to say, but there you go. So now I'm going to get into a body of work that came out of a flight I took in 2008 aboard the Russian parabolic flight aircraft. That might sound like Chinese, but what it means is there's a plane that most every space agency uses to train their cosmonauts or astronauts. It's flying in big arcs through the sky and produces 25 seconds of weightlessness or double gravity. And it repeats these maneuvers over and over again. So I'll first show a video of the installation as it was installed. So I can play it again if needed, but basically what you have is there was a third projection opposite the far projection. Let's see if I can. Yeah, so this is basically this installation looking the other way. So you have 3 large projections that are showing footage that was attached, that was exterior to the plane. So the cameras were attached to the plane, so they were only looking out and fixed. And then on these small DVD players on the stands were 8 additional channels that were filming within the spaces of the airplane, including the cockpit and the main experiment space, laboratory space, where I was floating and falling with my eyes closed, my ears blocked, and I was naked. So for me, it was an exploration of both trajectory and the kind of spatial extent, the spatial volume inside this plane and its oscillations. Thus the title is Singular Oscillations. So this is just a sense of kind of one simultaneous moment, some of the different channels. I'll show you a little bit more. So the video was one thing, and then there's been a body of work that's continued to come out of this. So this is a frame, it's Singular Oscillations Correspondences. It's this video still of me floating in the cabin of the aircraft, and together with an email from a retired astronaut that emailed me after my flight once he saw images of what I did. So I'll just read it. Hi Brad, on my last space flight, all male, when 4 of the 7 crew were asleep, 2 shift flight, and the other 2 on my shift were up on the flight deck, I took an extended nude float in the middeck after a body wash. It was a memorable experience. I often shut my eyes, and if I totally relaxed, could get a psychological cocoon to envelop my body. The less external physical stimulation, the better. It's hard to duplicate in 25-second increments, but keep up the interesting work. When I received this email, it was quite touching, because years before I took this flight, I had asked this astronaut had he ever floated naked in space, and he refused to answer the question. Was basically embarrassed and defensive, and just would not go there. And it was only after seeing images of what I did on this plane that he sent me this email. So for me, this is really a confession, and it kind of confirmed my intuition that things like this are happening all the time in space, but because of the strict demands we put on the environment, namely that it's only worth making the investment in space if it's going to generate data, quantified data. This sort of thing doesn't come to the surface, so it's often marginalized, whereas this is the type of thing that I want to reframe and put in the frame. So another work was this body coordinates, and I apologize, it's kind of hard to document. They're thin pencil lines on these 3 A4 pages, and what I was interested in is the relative motion that weightlessness just kind of throws in your face. It's really hard to ignore. And the relative motion between my body, the aircraft, and the ground. So on each of these pages, I'll just start from the upper left. If you're standing on the ground and watching the plane fly through the air, you would see it do this maneuver. Now, if you were in the airplane and you assumed you weren't moving and you were to watch a point on the ground move, it would be moving in this, actually from right to left, it would be moving in this way. So it's the same maneuver, it's just you decide which point is the origin to graph the other one's motion. In the middle you have, on the top, how my body moved relative to the plane. And then on the middle bottom is how the plane moved relative to my body. So I was tumbling through this empty space. So for me, I actually felt completely still when I wasn't touching anything. So for me, the plane was tumbling around me. On the far right, you have how the ground moved relative to me. So again, it's basically the earth was kind of moving around me because I felt myself stable. But then if you were on the ground and you could see through the plane, my body more or less would have followed the trajectory of the plane. So it kind of has this completion. So of course, a lot of this experience was disorienting, and that was part of my interest, was to enter a space of disorientation. And also, typically I feel in aerospace, explorations of space, often like we humans impose ourselves on the environment so that we can extract information from it. And I'd flown aboard these planes before this flight in 2008. So in this case, entering the space as an artist, I wanted to do something totally different that wasn't data-driven, and in fact, arguably was maybe undocumentable. Because of course, even though you have video footage of what kind of my physical body was doing in the space, it doesn't do anything to document the experience itself. I'll show you a series of video stills that are triptychs. So these are all the same moment from 3 different camera angles. It's basically 3 cameras oriented in a Cartesian 3-axis system, one looking straight out the front of the plane, one looking straight out the belly of the plane, and one looking out the right side of the plane. So I'll just kind of go through these slowly. What I really was fascinated in this footage and in these stills is despite this highly rational placement of cameras, I still find a lot of disorientation. Sometimes it's even hard for me to look at them and remember which one is pointing forward, which one's pointing down. There's also a lot about this project deals with interior and exterior. So I liked very much that in these camera angles, you don't see any part of the plane, but just by chance, there were a few moments where the plane flew over puddles or bodies of water, and you got this moment of reflection. Similarly here, that's the reflection of the plane in the truck that's come to push the plane back to its parking spot. And then also, I consider that center image a reflection as well, because just as I see your body and it kind of reflects something about my body, seeing a plane of the same make and model is somehow a reflection of the vehicle that these cameras are trapped inside of. So I think it's very much similar to the bodily experience of looking out, but kind of the observer being inside the vehicle, and if you want to say it like that. So that email from the astronaut, I was struggling a lot with the documentation and wondering, okay, now that I felt like maybe I had succeeded in producing something that's undocumentable, what do I do with the documentation and everything else? Or how do I show it? And that email brought something, made me realize that I think the strongest way of documenting something is to share it with somebody else. So this experience that I had in the plane was basically shared by this astronaut and his experience. So he didn't kind of need to see the documentation because he had experienced the same sort of thing. And this led to the idea of offering this experience to somebody else. And I'm really interested in emphasizing the experience as the work and the owner as the vessel of the work. So prohibiting any documentation on this flight. And a certificate of ownership in the art market exists behind every work of art. It's almost a receipt. So I wanted to use that as the only kind of evidence of transferal of ownership. Yeah, it's kind of hard to read up there. It says, the work consists of the attempt to know the empty, uninterrupted volume of variable gravity space contained within the Russian parabolic flight aircraft without affecting it in any way. You get to realize this work during a 10 parabola flight. The purchaser will be the only passenger permitted to occupy the cabin during the flight. No documentation of the flight will be permitted. So I also was interested in kind of giving the purchaser the same sort of conundrum that I was dealing with as an artist, because I was very much interested in the empty space. But how do you experience an empty space without fracturing its emptiness or destroying its emptiness? So I was trying to almost frame for the collector or the purchaser the same sort of paradoxical desire that I had going into it. This is a more recent work, but coming out of the same sort of investigations. It's called Weightless Cross Sections, and it's 5 pieces of glass. The widest is about like this, and they're maybe this tall. And they're the cross sections of various weightless spaces, weightless interiors on and off the planet. So it's basically an architectural, slice through the cabin of 4 parabolic flight aircraft. The largest one is the Russian. The widest one is the French plane that flies in these maneuvers. The 2 smallest ones are 2 American planes, and then the square, which probably is, I don't know if it's easy to pick out, I know what I'm looking at, is the International Space Station. And it takes on a really nice quality of the glass being transparent, of course, but as you move, it catches different reflections, so it kind of has this interesting oscillation between like flatness and depth, which I think resonates with this interest of an empty volume, kind of how to capture it in a way. So I should say the glass in this next work, actually most of this work was part of that installation which I showed you the video of. This is a work called Spirit Level Playback. And you can see it in relation to the weightless cross sections there in the back. So it's basically a subwoofer on legs, and then on the cone of the subwoofer, there's a replica of this weightless spirit level that's in the Russian plane. So in the Russian plane, it functions such that in weightlessness, the fluid in that cylinder floats in the center and becomes a ball. And it's like, as long as the fluid is floating in the center, you have weightless conditions. So it's basically like a spirit level that you would check to make sure your painting's horizontal, but it's designed for weightlessness. And it's just a really beautiful analog indicator. And I've been kind of thinking about it for a long time. And in this installation, the jet engine noise from the aircraft is being pumped through the cone, through the subwoofer. So it's vibrating and kind of activating the fluid inside the spirit level. And I don't know if you noticed when I played the video, but it just happens that the volume of the jet engine noise, as well as its kind of frequency characteristics, changes completely in sync with the gravity level experienced in the plane. So the plane starts a very steep climb. It goes 50 degrees with its nose in the air, and the engines are running full throttle, and that's exactly when you have a double gravity period. And of course, the engine's at full throttle, it's like takeoff. It's very, very loud. And then as it enters into the weightless period, the engines pull back to idle. So all of a sudden the sound drops out and it becomes relatively very quiet. And then again, as the wind builds up on the airframe and the engines engage on the back end, you have double gravity, and again, quite loud. So what you see here is in the double gravity portions, the liquid is really jumping and completely agitated. And then as it reaches the weightless bits, it becomes flat and clean, like in this photo. So there's kind of the flight is being played back through this device, and it's kind of registering what I experienced in a totally different way. And this project is continuing. I'm actually working towards modifying the actual aircraft in Russia, which is a multi-year project to say the least. But before chasing it down, I've worked with a programmer to make a flight simulator of the aircraft. This is a work in progress, but this we pieced together this summer. And it's using a very accurate aerodynamic simulation to simulate the plane itself, and then using the Unity game engine to simulate the interior of the plane, so that as you fly the plane, objects inside the cabin are reacting to the forces that the plane is experiencing. And in this case, we developed an autopilot system so that the plane could be flying continually in these maneuvers during this kind of studio visit, open studio event. So this is a work in progress. And then I just wanted to quickly mention, this is a project that was in 2009. It was a collaboration with Raymond van Ey, who's a researcher was at Utrecht University. He's now with Philips. And KNAV, the Royal Academy of Arts and Sciences. It was a mirror. We made a mirror based on MRI scans of my eyes, such that when my eyes are located in the center of the mirror, each eye is seeing a reflection of the other eye. And again, this was coming out of an interest of kind of what would it be to produce the undocumentable, and kind of can science and technology be used to produce something that kind of cuts itself at its own knees. So, which I was surprised never came up in this whole process. But basically, because it's made for my eyes only, and because you can't get a camera in there if my eyes are in there, it's kind of, it totally, you don't have the statistical numbers to do a scientific experiment with this thing, and that therefore undermines the whole scientific endeavor in terms of how science could potentially use the thing. But of course, it's a product of technology, some very advanced, cutting-edge technology, which is often motivated in the name of objectivity and reaching the masses. So here it was, for me, turning it on its head of using cutting-edge technology that's always motivated by reaching the masses and kind of being universal and objective, and making it for two eyes. Then we held a roundtable discussion, which I think was actually the most interesting part, with scientists, engineers, artists, curators, to try and kind of understand what is this thing. And in that discussion, it wasn't just about the optical reflection anymore, but became a communal reflection where we were all kind of, by the questions we were asking and by the way we were probing what it was and what demands we were putting on it, it became kind of a way to expose our own cognitive filters and our own paradigms. So in that way, we were kind of able to reflect on kind of the values that we chose to embody and pursue. And the last slide I wanted to show is this this found object, which I found while I was at the Rijksakademie. But I think kind of in a physical form, it gets back to the diagrams I started with in terms of where does the functional, valuable, and real lie, and maybe challenging some of those notions. In case anybody doesn't know, this is a pair of engineering calipers which are made to measure widths and depths very accurately, and they've been twisted and destroyed in terms of their functionality, but for me there's still like a weird precision that's still locked up and embodied in this thing, but it's not functional. And then what does what does non-functional precision mean? I don't know, but I love the idea. So this is kind of a bit of a totem or a kind of mascot that I think of in terms of my practice. So that's what I wanted to share with you, and thanks.